Hi, and welcome to another Advocacy Hour. I am Rebecca Thomas, the chair of the board for the New Evangelicals and your lone host for today's Advocacy Hour. Malynda is away at a conference in DC, and so I will be joining our very spectacular guest today. It is Pride Month, and so because it's Pride Month and as an affirming organization, it is deeply meaningful to us that we are talking about how do we engage with Pride beyond celebration. We want to provide you, our listeners, actionable steps to not just participate in Pride, maybe at a parade, but also what can you do? How can we engage right now, especially coming into a political season where there's going to be elections and there's going to be a lot of messaging. So that's what our topic is today. I'm going to be speaking with Ross Murray, the Vice President of Education and Advocacy at GLAAD. Ross just did a workshop with us last week, and so now we thought it'd be a great time to have him come on the podcast. I wanted to just share a little bit about GLAAD before we go into that conversation, because I think it's really important to understand GLAAD as an organization and what they do. So their mission is this: as a dynamic media force, GLAAD ensures fair, accurate, and inclusive representation that rewrites the script for LGBTQ acceptance. GLAAD tackles tough issues to shape the narrative and provoke dialogue that leads to cultural change. GLAAD protects all that has been accomplished and envisions a world with a 100% LGBTQ acceptance. I think another thing that is really, what an incredible goal. First of all, 100% acceptance, and I dream of the world where that exists as a parent of queer children. I also want to share a couple of GLAAD facts they published yesterday on their website. It was published, I realize this will come out after this, June 1st is when this was published. And these are some valuable pieces of information, some facts from a survey that they did between March and April 2nd of this year. And I think this just provides some context as to why this conversation is so relevant. 91% of non-LGBTQ Americans agree that LGBTQ people should have the freedom to live their life and not be discriminated against. This goes against a lot of maybe what we hear in messaging, and we'll get back to why messaging is so important in this conversation. And according to Gallup, the percent of LGBTQ Americans is up over 160% since 2012. Gen Z adults are 2 times more likely to be LGBTQ and 1.6 times more likely to know someone in their community and 1.2 times more likely to support LGBTQ people. 44% of registered voters also say that the LGBTQ issues and talking points are not their priority right now. They actually are seeing increased costs and inflation as the number one talking point. And so I think that's why we need to address media, messaging, and how all of that is kind of working together, especially as our media landscape changes for everyone. We're on social media, we're watching the news, we might be listening to podcasts. And so get ready for a very exciting conversation with Ross Murray. We'll be back after this break. All right. Welcome back, everyone. I am joined now by our guest, as promised, Ross Murray, the Vice President of Education and Advocacy for GLAAD. Hi, Ross. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. For our audience, I know this might be the first time that they're meeting you, and so I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of a short bio. Who are you? Where are you? How long you've been with GLAAD?
Sure. I have been with GLAAD for 15 years now. I've had a variety of jobs. I originally was the director of religion, faith, and values. And, because jobs change, titles, funding changes, I've been overseeing the South global work. And when they set up the GLAAD Media Institute, they wanted a portion that was really focused on training and education and consultation work. So I'm part of that used a lot of the research that GLAAD does. And then outside of GLAAD, the overlap that gets me outside of GLAAD is I'm also an ordained deacon in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and weird church politics, but your call is your job. And so my call is to GLAAD at doing LGBTQ advocacy. But then on the side, I also am the founder and director of the Naming Project, which is an LGBTQ youth ministry, queer church camp for teenagers. And all those things sort of mesh together, both in how to do direct ministry for young people and then how to build a world that's going to be welcoming and safe for young people to grow into who God made them to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was reading a little bit about that camp, and it's in Minnesota. Is that right?
It
So it's
is, yes.
I am curious too. We're talking about GLAAD a little bit today and what GLAAD is doing. So before we dive into some further questions, because I want to talk about you being a deacon and how that really fits into your work, but I want to know a little bit more for our listeners, some of the background about GLAAD as an organization. So I know the history is really extensive, but I just love to get people to get a sense of the work that GLAAD is doing.
Sure. I've been at GLAAD now for 15 years, and GLAAD is a 41-year-old organization. It started in 1985 as actually a protest. It was the height of the AIDS crisis. There was a lot of misunderstanding. It was called GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency, and the local media in New York City, the newspapers, were not covering the news. They were calling it punishment for who they were and their actions. It was making fun of them. It was diminishing them. And so GLAAD, alongside of some of those other activist groups that you probably know from that era, would hold protests outside of local newspapers, like the New York Post, which still exists and still pretty terrible.
Yep.
And so it did that to be a watchdog and to hold media accountable for defamation. And there was another group that was working in Los Angeles that was working on inclusion in the entertainment industry. And those went through a lot of iterations. At one point, it was chaptered all over the country. But we are an organization that works with the media and media representation of LGBTQ people and how that makes people think and feel about the community, how comfortable they are, and ultimately will influence their actions and behaviors about how well a parent's going to accept their child, or a coworker is going to treat each other, or what policies we vote on and pass laws in this country. And so realizing that this really is getting at people, not legally or politically, but in their heart, in their mind, and understanding the reality about who we are. And of course, we've been in a pivot lately because the media has gone from film and television and journalism into social media and AI and podcasting like this, and content creators and influencers. And the media's the average American consumes more than 12 hours of media a day, more than we spend eating, sleeping, and exercising. Wow. So it is a part of our lives and is yet so fragmented that we are not in the same media ecosystem that like our neighbor is.
Right. And we'll kind of talk more about your workshop that you did last week, but just throwing back to that, I was watching the replay of it, and what struck me about it, and I mean, I suppose we should know this, but to your point, we are living in different media ecosystems from our neighbors, from the people that we work with. And so that's such an important point to bring up, because what you are doing and what GLAAD is doing is really impacting everyone all of the time, whether we know it or not, because media is a part of our lives. Like you said, average of 12 hours a day. That is wild. I would like to think I don't do that, but if I really took stock, I probably do. I am probably no different than
when you're eating,
else.
You're scrolling on your phone. When you're exercising, there's probably a TV running in front of you. So 12 hours makes sense because we're multitasking through most of this.
Right. And we can have a podcast on in the background while we're cleaning our kitchen or something. I know I like to do that. And so I think that's a really important point. This is a very resonant topic for all of us right now, especially given that it is Pride Month and it's at the top of people's minds. It's important to see the work that GLAAD is doing. So I'm glad we're getting to talk about that today. And because we are a faith-based organization, a lot of our work is centered around faith and justice. I would love to hear a little bit about how your work with GLAAD and your faith journey have come together to motivate you in this work.
Yeah, it's, I briefly had a job at a university, at the college that I went to, actually, and they got a grant from the Lilly Foundation for universities to explore vocation. What is God calling me to do in the world? And so I use the word vocation like all the time because that sort of got like, it sort of got imbued into me. And, I think about that same kind of journey. I was going to be a youth ministry person. That's what I went to college for, youth and family ministry. And I joined one of those traveling musical ministry teams that goes around to perform at churches. And, I had, moving from a tiny town to a larger city here in the Twin Cities, I decided I was going to come out and be very honest about who I was. And I did that. And I was very well accepted at the college experience, and had friends, was active in campus ministry, even had conservative roommates and classmates that came from more conservative backgrounds. And I don't know, because of my natural charm and charisma, I won them over. And I just sort of believed that was going to carry me through the rest of my life. And when I joined that traveling musical ministry program, my natural charm and charisma did not win them all over and result in the same thing. So getting removed from that organization really was the thing that set me on a trajectory to do this sort of advocacy work. And I started because of that experience working with a group that was helping to make the Lutheran Church more welcoming and inclusive, first with individual congregations, and then building up to, actually in 2009, the entire denomination changing policies that were going to allow clergy in same-gender relationships and LGBTQ clergy and leaders, and so made some very specific policy changes. And I saw a tempest in a teapot happening with that there was so much angst and anxiety, and what does this mean, and people are going to leave, blah, blah, blah. And I also had this realization: nobody gives a shit what Lutherans think in larger society. We are not the dominant religious group that's swaying public opinion, but there is this organization, GLAAD, that knows how to harness media in a way that does sway public opinion, how they think, how they feel. And there was an opening for a job, Director of Religion, Faith, and Values, so I could work with the same people that I'd been working with to make their churches more welcoming, to make their entire denominations more welcoming, but also have that external societal influence that meant that these welcoming things that we learned weren't just kept to ourselves, but actually was something that we wanted people to be safe and comfortable and happy when they're outside of our church as much as when they're inside of our church. And so really that's kind of the trajectory that got me to GLAAD. And then things grow and change, and apparently I'm good at stuff. So now I'm doing civic engagement and voting and corporate consulting, which I never thought I'd be a corporate person, but they listen to what we have to say and take us seriously, because we give them an argument that matches what they're thinking, but also ends up being good for community and good for society.
Yeah, and they depend on social media too. I mean, I know that you talk a bit about sports teams messaging as well. And yesterday there were a lot of NFL teams that were posting about Pride, and my team in particular posted about it, which made me very happy to be a fan of that team. But I know they depend on their own social media too, to build their fan bases and to communicate with people. And so, I think it is awesome that these corporate groups are reaching out and utilizing the messaging services of GLAAD, because they certainly probably couldn't do it. Maybe they couldn't do the same elevated job that GLAAD can do. I mean, this is what you all do over there. So I am wondering, and I love hearing your story, because I know when this experience of being asked to leave is not unique to your experience, was unique to you, but there are a lot of people who have also experienced that. And I think it's just a testament and a reminder that our worlds feel so big, but there is also this big wide world beyond what is happening to us. And so I love that you were able to find a space to utilize your talents and gifts and this vocation that you'd been called to do even greater work than what you were doing within the Lutheran Church. I think that is just such an encouragement, and hopefully some of our listeners hear that as well. And I know a lot of our listeners are navigating the intersection of faith and identity. So what message would you offer to our audience who have felt rejected by their religious communities?
Yeah. I mean, when I went through this myself, and I think you're right, the experience that I had with that organization is definitely not the worst experience that any queer person ever had with the church. That was mild compared to some of the stories that I've heard from other people, but it was at least enough of a wake-up call and a motivator for me to work. And so a couple things that I realized, and I had to work through this myself. When I got kicked out of the organization, was my issue with God. It wasn't. It was with people, and probably specifically the people that were very directly involved with this experience. This
Sure.
organization wasn't even formally affiliated with a church or a denomination, so it's not like I even blamed the denomination for what happened. Right? It was, oh, this is a group that had created its own kind of insular culture, and I could see was trying to figure it out in real time. They were responding to my being out a little bit as a crisis, and that happened for a while before I got kicked out of the organization. And so, and then finding a group where I did welcome, where I was welcomed, and where I did belong, made a huge difference because I could see the overlap between my particular story and the ones that other ones had. And now I am at the point where, and I've said this to many people too, I do not apologize or explain being gay to people. I state it as a reality and a fact. And I state the reality and the fact of me being a gay man who is Christian, who is a deacon, who has a vocation and a calling. Matter of fact, I don't explain it. I don't talk about it as a contradiction because the reality is it hasn't been. And what happens so much in messaging is that we adapt so much anti-LGBTQ messaging. They're very good at getting it out there first. They're very good at defining the terms of the debate. And right. I don't want to be a part of that debate. If someone thinks that there is an inherent contradiction between my being gay and my being Christian, that struggle is with them, and I'm not going to make that my struggle. And so they can do the mental work there. And I think that's important, one, for me to have a sense of, I know who God made me to be. And if someone else hasn't figured that out yet, that can be their area of comfort. Now I can walk them through it and I can help them through it to the point that I'm going to keep myself protected and safe too. But I've been done being like, well, not all Christians think that. I don't want the default to be anti-LGBTQ. I want the default to be this sense of we're all created in the image of God, and that's going to include all of who we are. And we can just talk about that like it is a given reality as opposed to something that would be up for debate.
Yeah, I love that. I feel that, social media, especially like Facebook and things like that, where people are just kind of going at it in the comments, it feels like everything is open to debate, and it just doesn't need to be. So I love that. And I feel like many times I'm like, I know what I believe. I know who I am. I don't need to get into a conversation with you. And who are you anyway? Right? They are their own person, but in the midst of this, sometimes I love how you said that. The work is for them to do, not for you to convince them of. And I think that's really important, especially right now when we are also interactive on social media and consuming so much. And It feels like everything's up for debate. And it just really isn't. So that's a great reminder, I think, to everyone.
It's also good, as much as I talk about media, it's also a good reminder to like turn everything off and go talk to real people in your life.
Right.
People are so much more real in person than they are online. And it's not to say that you won't have fights with people in person, but it's so like people, there is a little bit of decency still in when we're in real life together.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I am curious. Right now it is Pride Month. And so I know that there's a lot of LGBTQ rights are in some ways advancing. Maybe the statistics that I read at the beginning of the show are kind of showing that people are like, they just want to go and live their lives. They don't want to worry about how other people are living their lives. We're seeing more of that. And at the same time, we are seeing legislation that is rolling back rights of LGBTQ people. And so I wonder, what would you say as people of faith, how do we engage in Pride beyond celebration?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a great setup. I mean, there are more people that are LGBTQ than ever, despite all of the attempts to try to block and roll back. And I have to remind myself during Pride and every month, we are definitely ahead of where we were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And as much as we are still facing like unbelievable pushback and a lot of erosion of those rights, we're still in so much a better, safer place where we get to live our lives. That's not true for everyone everywhere, and part of our work is to make sure that we do. I think I talk about this with a lot of churches, right? Like, because besides the youth ministry piece from the naming project, I do talk about advocacy because that's my work at GLAAD too. And pride celebrations or parades or marches are one good entry point. There's a couple things I say about engaging with pride. Don't think about pride as a marketing campaign for your churches. Think about it as a place where you come in and act like a guest in someone's home. See the breadth and the diversity of this community. See how there's some ways in which the things that we do are so profound and filled with meaning. Some are light and silly and fun. Some are only meant for adults. Some are family friendly. The ways in which we all engage, that is how big and broad and diverse we are as a community. And some of us do have a longing for a faith home and for a faith community that can help support who we are. And even if we wouldn't label it as Christian for some people, they still want to be a part of a community and perhaps want to be part of something that's doing good. And being a part of Pride is good. And then how do you make that last beyond the month of June or the one celebration when it happens? One thing I've talked about is for church leaders, for clergy and people that lead churches, building the relationship with the local community. No matter how small the town is, there is an LGBTQ community there somewhere. And maybe there's a formal organization. Maybe there's people that get together for coffee on Thursday mornings or brunch on the weekends or whatever, but they exist. And we can also engage with them, find out what's important to them, what's facing them, and where do they need help. So, I use this as an example. Transgender Day of Remembrance is different than so many other LGBTQ celebrations because it's not a celebration. In fact, I shouldn't even said that. It's not a celebration. It is closer to a memorial service, a funeral service.
Correct.
Remembering trans people who were lost to violence. Who does funerals better than churches? We have the infrastructure. We have a building. We have volunteers. We have a way that we have been able to organize and structure memorial services that can give space for grief. And I'm not saying that we take that stuff over. What I'm saying is that we bring that to the leaders and say, if you need, we have a space. We have people. We can help you put this together. And we have experience with this. You are going to lead it and be in charge and have it be the spiritually meaningful thing that it needs to be for you. And we'll be there to help and support that. And even when we do that, some of them don't want to enter into a church, and we're going to have to be okay with them saying that. But them knowing the offer is there and building that relationship and building that trust in our churches and our institution of churches actually, I think, ends up being helpful. And that trust will only be demonstrated through the actions that we take, not because we have said something or proclaimed something.
Right. I am a firm believer that how we behave tells everything about what we actually believe. We could say so many things, but it doesn't really matter until we see how people act. Then we know for sure. And I love what you're saying. You're talking about really values-based leadership as opposed to like we have a set of beliefs and so we lead from that. And it's not that. It's saying we value these things and so we lead in that way. And I think you're also kind of bringing in this idea of like resources. People don't need to do this work and figure it out on their own. They don't need to come up with all of the things by themselves because so many groups have already done that. Like GLAAD has done so much around media and messaging and how to communicate about LGBTQ topics in a really effective way, right? And I would like to think that the New Evangelicals also has a good set of resources because we've spent a lot of time to curate those. And so I think that's something to offer the listeners of the show as well. There are so many resources available. If they're feeling called to this work, there are resources available to them. So I think maybe in that way, I know you talked in the workshop last week, which I highly encourage everyone to go and watch the replay, because there was so much value in that. You provided so many graphics and a lot of detail about the audience and like the movable middle. And you talked about values-based messaging. And so I would just like to hear a little bit more about how do you provide that in the world? I know you talked a little bit about heated rivalry. You mentioned that, and I was like, oh, I want to touch on that because it really did showed the world that inclusiveness really is the shared value that's so, especially for a pretty significant demographic. So what do we garner from what happened with maybe that show, or even what happened like with Snoop and the circumstance there? What do we garner from that as far as messaging and what GLAAD is really able to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I think I love how you phrase that too. If I do workshops to faith groups, the first thing I start with is the parable that Jesus tells about the two sons, that he tells both the work in the field. One says, I will go, and then doesn't. The other one says, like, no, and then he actually does. And I sort of say, wouldn't it be nice if there was a third child, let's say a daughter, who actually both said what she was going to do and then actually went and did it? Like, there's the ideal, right? But we don't get that in the story. We sort of get the actions end up being more important than the words, the proclamation, the statements. And yeah, I think the idea of not having to do it yourself. And I am really big on leveraging the resources that exist out there. I think in some ways people feel like they have to know and understand and explain everything. And that's just not always possible, which is why media becomes a really helpful tool for doing that. I don't know if people expected heated rivalry to be as popular as it was. And popular, again, not with a niche like gay crowd, because it's a very gay story. But one that hockey fans, that women, that straight people, all really got into, and enjoyed it so much too. And then it becomes that discussion talking point, because one of those stereotypes, much like being gay and Christian, is also sports, right? It's masculine, it's pretty homophobic. There's a lot of slurs that get thrown around, especially in men's sports. And this show found a way, and the book that it's based on, I will say too, found a way to confront that head on and both be real and accurate about the sport itself, so that hockey fans could watch this and say, okay, I can recognize everything that they're doing and saying. And also, what are the pressures that someone feels when they are in the public eye, that they're beloved by everybody, and anything they say or do has the potential to completely derail their career in life. And again, I love, I pull parallels to a lot of stories, right? In my book, I wrote a little bit about this too. The story of Esther is exactly the same thing. It is a woman who is elevated into a position where she has access to power, she has visibility, she has this presence, and she has a secret about her identity. And if she shares it, comes out in the wrong way, it's going to be harmful for her and for everybody else in her people. Mm-hmm. And she has to be very careful. So again, heated rivalry and Esther are the same story. That's the takeaway from this podcast. But they're not the same. But they are this way of thinking, what are the stakes that still come out with coming out, especially when somebody is high profile and beloved and feels like they have everything, they've earned everything, and they're on the brink of losing it. And how to do that coming out in a thoughtful, careful way that's going to be good, not just for you, but for everybody else that you are representing, and you don't even know who all those people are. And I think those resources, the ones that GLAAD does, the stories we tell, the real people, they're all intended to give the idea of people being able to relate to people's lives. And to say, this is not a community that is radically different, or I don't know who they are, or I don't understand them, and it's big and confusing, because you do understand the thoughts and feelings and emotions that go into so many of our experiences, because in some way we've probably experienced it somewhere else.
Mm, that's really beautiful. I did notice there's a lot of storytelling, and it's a way to engage maybe in conversation before in person, like you said, being in relationship, right? It is a way to engage with a lot of stories beyond just our local communities. And I think that's so important when we talk about this big wide world that exists, and it's so much more than where we find ourselves geographically. And it's beyond what we see in our little algorithmic bubbles. And you did talk about one thing too in that workshop about verification culture. So I know we're in this time where there's so much going on and people want it, like, what's the source? Where did you get that? And even, people are putting things out that aren't true. We know there are bots that are out there, AI, all these things. So can you tell me a little bit about how GLAAD is also working to navigate the verification of news and media?
Yeah, this is a big one. We did research that found that 75% of Americans say that they sometimes don't believe what they are seeing and hearing in the media.
Wow.
And again, the media is big and broad. So the way that our president has used the term fake news has absolutely stuck with people, and we tend to think something is fake. And again, some of these old institutional news outlets have not helped themselves by the way that they've acted. The CNNs, the New York Times, or you've seen them change, like 60 Minutes, right, which has been always seen as so trusted, and lately people are starting to wonder, can I trust what's coming from them? And then the same thing's happening in social media with AI, with deep fakes, with manipulated photos. And so someone sees something and then says, well, I don't know if I believe it. And they're going to up to 4 different sources to verify if something's true. I mentioned this. I'm in the cities. We endured an ICE invasion, Operation Metro Surge. Two of our citizens were killed by ICE agents. In one of those instances, someone doctored a photo of Alex Preddy getting shot to make it look more dramatic. And I don't know the motivation behind why someone did it, but the result is people will question the entire story because of now there's a doctored photo with it, right? And the horrific killing did happen, but the manipulated photo now makes people say, I don't know if I can trust any of this entire story. And what happens, where people are going, they want to see news stories that back up something on social media. They're Googling, they're asking AI, and then they're asking people they know in their real life. So people that see these stories now come to me and say, oh my goodness, I just saw this. Is this for real? And I'm their verifier because I just happen to live close to it, not even that I'm experiencing it. Or the other thing that's fascinating to us is they are looking at the comments on social media. So there's a post, and then I believe people are saying stuff about it, and they are saying, does that person sound like me? Is that the kind of person that I'm going to trust? And they're going to help me interpret what I'm seeing from up above. And so that truth ends up being really important. And, what is truth is kind of those enduring questions. For a lot of people, they used to, believe because Walter Cronkite said it, it's true, and I'm going to believe it and operate. Now people want to hear truth from people that sound like them, that sound like their friends. This is why podcasting is really powerful, because it sounds like my friends chit-chatting about stuff. And even if it's not about the news or about something that's political or social, it slips in that conversation, and that's what influences people. And it's been used to influence people against the LGBTQ community, especially transgender people. That conversation's been going on for a long time. And it can, and it should also be used so that we can be conversational and chit-chat, and people can learn more about the community because they're hearing about my life or my story, or the story of a transgender minister that I have worked with, or the story of anyone that's talking about what their life is like, that people go, oh my goodness, that sounds a lot like me. And in a lot of cases,
creating resonance for sure. Mm-hmm. So is there, I think you said in that workshop, and people can go watch in more detail about this, but is there a tool that GLAAD is creating for that kind of verification? Is that what I saw?
So a couple things. I mean, this is ever evolving, because in a week's time, well, a week from when we're recording this, I don't know if this is going out, but we are about to release a report on AI and safety and the LGBTQ community. And tomorrow, I'm saying all these relative dates like it's going to make sense to people who listen, but on June 3rd, our president's going to talk about it at the Axios AI Summit during Tech Week in New York. And then on the 10th of June, the AI report will be published and everyone can access it. It really looks at policies, user experience, safety for the community, making sure that representation is accurate and the need for it. We've been doing that on social media for a long time. And that is telling the companies and the platforms what they need to be doing to keep the community safe. And then we've also built out a social media tool for people to keep themselves safe. So content creators, the people that are engaging online. We also do briefings and workshops on identifying who's your target audience, who's the person that has the most to learn from what you have to say, and what are the stories and the examples that are going to make sense for them, that are going to resonate with them and help them to learn. And then we do these ongoing briefings. So I never mentioned before we started recording here too, we've been doing briefings with corporate audiences and with leaders about consumer attitudes. Do consumers care if there's Pride merchandise or not? They either like it or they're indifferent. There's very few people that are vocally against it. And most people think of it the same as selling sports team merchandise. And so think of Pride merch alongside your NFL jerseys or sweatshirts or whatever. Yeah. And we've also got some data that we just put out a couple days ago that's been about voter attitudes, right? Like you hear a lot of ads and a lot of news commentary about transgender people and who they are and what they're doing. That is not the top issue the voters have. This year, right. Voters care a lot about the cost of living and affordability, and that they want they want political leaders to be lowering the cost of living, creating jobs, than spending a lot of time worrying about the healthcare that transgender people might be getting, or a girl playing on a basketball team, or someone just trying to live their life. And right now, they're very cynical, thinking that a lot of political leaders are using transgender people for political gain rather than actually trying to help or hurt trans people, or that it's being used as a distraction from other issues.
Yeah, it's incredible how powerful messaging really, really is when you think about those numbers. And I was looking at that report that was published yesterday, and it is just kind of mind-boggling. But I mean, it's the same thing that's used in marketing and advertising and all of these things. So it works on us. So I love that GLAAD has these resources and tools to help us be more aware, especially as we see things or we engage with that movable middle who might be reading something and thinking, oh, this is true. And we could say, you know what? I actually have a really good resource for you to go and find out more about that topic. And so hopefully our listeners will go and explore the GLAAD website. There's so much on there. GLAAD is doing so much work. But before we go, I do want to know, I have a couple questions for you. So what are one or two takeaways that you would love our listeners to get from this conversation as far as what to do next?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that you said that I think makes sense for what to do next. We've talked about how fragmented the media is, and the messages, the messaging, and the stories are really important. The way I have people who want to share and talk about this, think about all the different platforms where people can be hearing about us. We can't assume that everyone's seeing the same press release or seeing the same social media post. So I need them to hear the same message of acceptance on a social media post, at the 6 o'clock evening news, at the dinner table with their family and friends, from the pulpit, right? Like they've got to hear that same message in a lot of different places. And one, that's because we can't assume that they're all in the same place. And two, marketing tells us that they got to hear the same message at least 7 times in order to influence their behavior. To change a belief, that's like 20 plus times. And so undoing a lot of anti-LGBTQ, animus is one. So thinking about that. And then I go back to target audience. Who do you have influence over? And who is the movable middle in who you have influence over? Not everyone is going to be convinced by me, Deacon Ross Murray, Vice President at GLAAD and professional homosexual. I appeal to a certain type of person. I come from the Midwest. I can speak very Midwest. I'm a white cisgender guy. it means not everyone's going to listen to me. And to find the surrogates, and we're spending a lot of time at GLAAD at this, who are the other people that we can equip and give that messaging to so they can reach their audiences. And I think that's what's so powerful about the new Evangelicals and the group and the network that you formed is that, and this is what I hope happens with our future relationship. I will send you all like, here's data or talking points or whatever. It is not to tell any of you what to say. It is for you to have it to be informed and be like, oh, my audience would actually really like to hear this, but I need you to say it in your own words, right? Because your audience knows and trusts you. They may not trust me because they don't know who I am. And we tweak it that way. We can influence people on so much, but I think in our society, we get very scared of bringing this kind of stuff up and having these conversations. And so the last piece is we find ways to incorporate this into a lot of different conversations. It doesn't have to be the very special episode that is all about like coming out and acceptance. We want this integrated in conversations about sports, about gaming, incorporated into Bible studies, incorporated into social media, incorporated into true crime podcasts.
Right.
I joke, Americans love crime. We love our police procedurals. They love true crime. And we are a community that faces a disproportionate level of crime, and having some true crime podcasts tell our story in a really good, careful, nuanced way would go a long way to understanding what the community is facing and perhaps being able to step up to prevent it. So those are the kind of things that I think about for your audience. They have such a good, strong, powerful platform. And I'll say it bluntly, I would love to have you all be surrogates, ambassadors, message takers from GLAAD. So take whatever resources we have, but make them your own, make them for your audience. It is not dictating to you what you have to say. It's to help you feel like it's the resource to help you get started in what you want to say.
I love that. I think that's the ecosystems that we're trying to really build are that, figuring out what is my thing that I really want to talk about, but then also what can I do to be a surrogate for other communities. So I think that's so important. And I think that's exactly in line with what we're trying to do at the New Evangelicals. Thank you for those. I think those are very actionable things that people can be considering. My last question, and then I want to hear where people can find you and maybe a little bit about your camp, because I think you're trying to, you're soliciting for or recruiting for attendees, which is very exciting. If my youngest was old enough, I would totally send him. But I want to know, what is giving you hope right now?
That's a really good question. I have found it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the world. And when I get overwhelmed by the world, it comes out in the people that I know and have relationships the best. And the place where I've seen hope is when people really stick together, when they overcome the minutia of differences that we have to realize the really important goals that we're working on together. I was just part of a meeting at a conference this last weekend that really was a group of people of faith that were advocating for things like affordability and the ability to have housing and healthcare and dignity and community, and making sure our government's not weaponized against people. And so many nuances of how we could approach that, and so many different primary interests, and watching us really strategically stick together and say, we want leaders that are going to be thinking about this as an entire agenda, not just one or two items to get. And anything we do, we want to use that power to shape people. And I found that to be really, really hopeful. And I left that conference exhausted and yet also energized for how we can build this in the future.
Yeah, that's the good stuff. Even when the hard stuff can rejuvenate you, I think that's when you're in the right place. So thank you so much for joining me. Where can people stay in touch with you, with your work, and tell us a little bit more about this camp?
Yeah, so for finding me, my best place, I don't know how, I'm big on Blue Sky. In lay terms is me on Instagram, and then in lay terms, there's .bluesky.net, whatever. You'll find me there. And those are kind of places. I've not gotten to TikTok yet because I do not want too many social media platforms. I also have a website, rossmurray.org, that has links to the books and speaking and things like that. And then the naming project. thenamingproject.org. And you're right, our camp is the last week of July. We are currently accepting registrations for youth. We still got plenty of space. It's for LGBTQ youth and their allies, youth of any sexual orientation or gender identity, ages 14 to 18, so senior high. We spend a week on an island in a lake in central Minnesota, physically removed from the rest of the world. And if you have been to a church camp, this probably looks a lot like that. The thing that makes it super queer is the people that are there, right? We bring our own flourishes to it. We have developed our own rituals and traditions and hand motions for songs and stuff like that. That is the thing that makes it like super queer. And I will say the coffee house cabaret talent show at the end is one of the most fun things because the range of what young people do and the way in which they think of sharing their talents with us has been so cool. I will say the other thing I love about our camp, this is a tradition that just developed. I had a counselor that did not come from camp. And I was like, will you lead campfire? And he thought that just meant like give a talk. He didn't think about songs or anything. He talked about how meaningful Dolly Parton was to him and his identity and his faith. And loved it so much. The next year, the camp said, well, sometimes people like go out on the pontoon and they watch the sunset over the lake. So now, midweek, we have Dolly Parton pontoon campfire. So we get in a boat, we go out on the lake, we light some candles. He talks about Dolly Parton. He plays Jesus and Gravity and Traveling Through and To the Moon and Back. And then we sing a couple songs and then we boat back to the camp. And that is our campfire for that night, which is delightfully queer. Never would have happened anywhere else, that weird combination of stuff. But now it's we hold it really dear to us, which I love.
I love that. I love it so much. I hope that this year is just as magical as all years prior. And thank you so much for being here today and having this conversation with us. And I can't wait to do more work with you and with GLAAD.
All right. Thank you so much.